If you've been listening to the Business of Biotech podcast for a while now, you'll recall that Erin Harris has joined me to co-host a few episodes. Erin's my friend, colleague, and chief editor over at cellandgene.com, and she just recently launched a podcast of her own. It's aptly named Cell and Gene, the podcast. And if you're working in the cell and gene space, you should give it a listen. It's a collection of interviews with the industry and academic leaders moving the space forward. And you can find it at cellandgene.com or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Cell and Gene, the podcast. Check it out. Welcome to the Business of Biotech. I'm Matt Pillar, and my guest today is the former global head of biotech at Bayer and former VP of global pharmaceutical operations at Pfizer. She's served as a senior group leader and senior manager at Genentech, principal scientist and group leader at Pfizer, and senior scientist at AbbVie, in addition to VP of research, development, and manufacturing positions at the biotechs Tanvex Biopharma and Medvation. She currently serves on the boards of Acaro Therapeutics, Alex Med, UC Berkeley College of Engineering, and Silicon Valley Women in Engineering, and previously served the boards of Biocom, the Bay Area Council, and the Bayer Fund. She's been named to the most influential women in business list by the San Francisco Bay Times. And previous to all this, she earned her Ph.D. in biochemistry, cell biology, and neuroscience from Yale, did a postdoctoral fellowship at the Max Planck Institute for Biophysical Chemistry, and held a faculty research fellowship at Harvard Medical School. Her name is Dr. Judy Chou, and today she's president and CEO of AltruBio Incorporated, the company formerly known as AbbVie, a clinical stage developer of antibodies for autoimmune and immune-mediated inflammatory diseases. Dr. Chou, welcome to the show. I'm honored that you could join us.
Thank you for having me here.
It's absolutely our pleasure, and I need to catch my breath after that very long and distinguished CV that I just read off. I mean, as I mentioned, as I sort of rattled off the highlights of your career, you've had big pharma leadership experiences at AbbVie, Genentech, Pfizer, Bayer. Those are obviously very, very big names. Those are very comfortable places for a biotech exec to be, comfortable places for a biotech exec to stay. What motivated you to take that leap into emerging biotech and join AltruBio?
There's no doubt there are many big benefits in the big pharma, but there are also some hard to ignore advantage working in a small biotech company. Particularly, I will be able to, or I am able to now closer to the innovation and really drive for the science, technology, and innovation to the patients much more directly. And that's really the main reason I can join AltruBio.
Yeah, well, and that move was relatively recent, correct? You made that leap just last year.
Yes, the beginning of last year.
Right. I want to kind of get your perspective on what your observations you've already made around the differences between working in big pharma and the agility that you mentioned that you have and being closer to science, the science aspect of the job now. What have been, from your perspective, the biggest challenges that you've faced in the move to AltruBio that maybe these challenges wouldn't have presented themselves in a much larger company?
Certainly, I mean, bigger company and big pharma company has much so-called deeper pocket. So for many pipeline projects, common goals and is much more less fluctuation happening on the service. And then for small companies, the challenging really is much more vulnerable. So need to have much more strategy upfront to be able to get the needed funding, and also to be able to do that agile and nimble to change the direction in order to face all the challenges and making the right turn quickly. So those are the typical challenges between the big company and the small company. And not to mention, you particularly mentioned about the timing. And I think I probably picked the perfect time to join a small company because that's right before COVID. That makes the small company even more vulnerable in the beginning of last year.
Yeah, and for those of you listening to this podcast as opposed to viewing it, when Dr. Chou said the perfect time, she used air quotes. So just to give you some context there, perfect depending on your perspective, I suppose. What did you? I want to dig into that transition a little bit, and specifically, you mentioned funding, and that's obviously a big issue, one of the biggest for leaders of emerging biotechs. What did you do to prepare? I mean, when you were at these big pharmas, I imagine, as you said, they had deep pockets, and if funding was needed by your department, if you needed more resources, maybe an oversimplification, but you asked for it, and I'm sure in many cases you received it because it was there. How did you prepare as you came into AltruBio and faced? Now I know you had some board positions, so you probably had exposure to the funding mechanism prior. But as you came into AltruBio as the leader here last year and spent the last 18 months, let's say, as its leader, how did you prepare for that responsibility and that I guess the pressure of raising funds and keeping the company moving forward from a financial perspective?
Yeah, and I must also still give the credit of my immediately previous job at Bayer. Because allow me to explain a little bit, because my role at Bayer, I ran the biotech organization. So Bayer gave me this unique opportunity, probably just once in a lifetime, and also once in the entire 156 years of Bayer history, putting everything from R&D to manufacturing, supply, and everything in one shop. And that allowed me to have to really think through the overall strategy from creating pipeline to manufacturing to many things. So basically, I have to deliver a P&L organization under Bayer, meaning I need to drive for any non-small molecule to the profitable situation. So I must give the credit about even, yes, like you say, when I need the funding, I ask for it. But I really not mean to overemphasize the difficulties at the environment, but more or less in the comfortable setting at Bayer for all the years of success in small molecule. Any biologics, any non-small molecule, this is including the new modalities, need to be think about 10 times to say, why do we want to take the step to invest? And that really actually helped me prepare for my current position, meaning that I need to think through what really is beneficial from the investor. I mean, previous is my board at Bayer, and now it's from the investor point of view to see how I can bring the value for the investor, and ultimately really is to benefit for the patients. And that is very important for small organization. And that perspective helped me prepare to set up the right strategy to enable the fundraising for my current organization.
Yeah, it sounds like that last opportunity you had at Bayer was sort of the perfect training grounds to step into the role you have at AltruBio.
Certainly, yeah. Even though it's harder to imagine, people tend to think it's in a large company, it's fine. It's totally true. I mean, Bayer wouldn't fire me when I couldn't get the funding. However, it's the environment. I really need to think through how to, like I say, break everybody's default thinking about where the small molecule is very comfortable area. Why do we want to move to such a complicated molecule? And that's when I need to set up the right strategy, prioritization, and to show some quick win also to demonstrate that I can move that needle, and then to allow the board, and then now in the case about investor, feel comfortable to put more money in to see the progress of the company.
What did the company look like from a personnel and footprint standpoint when you joined it?
like I say about this quote unquote perfect storm, not only this is right away we face the challenge of COVID, but at the same time, the funding situation wasn't so good. So definitely it's almost impossible to move to the next step. This has something to do with not like because the company wasn't prepared to have me on board. It was very confident about at the time, the fundraising right at the time when I joined should be a smooth sail. But unfortunately, when COVID hit, that particularly round right before I joined did not succeed. So then facing a huge, unthinkable challenging and have to really prioritize and focus to change the company around.
Yeah. What about so I mean, I was going to ask you what's kept you up at night, but I think you've made that very clear. What about on the flip side of that? You mentioned the agility and the ability to be closer to the science and the patient impact in small emerging biotech. What other opportunities has this smaller organization presented that you're appreciating that you perhaps wouldn't have been able to appreciate with big pharma?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, if I were stay on the same path I'm talking about the challenge, and I definitely don't want to make sound like it was just so horrible to the degree it was. But I'm glad and grateful I have my board, which is everybody is all from Genentech, my former colleagues and leaders.
Yeah.
And we be able to make a decision very quickly. So I think it's really identified the quick win and also the quick kill. That's a trick. And for the bigger organization, that's harder. It's not because the bigger organization, everybody's lazy, not being making the decision. It's just when you are having a bigger group of people need to make decisions, the consensus become important. I mean, people tend to think about consensus negatively in a big organization. I do think that's important because you want to drive for the big organization to move forward. But for the small company like us, my board and just 6 of them, and including me, then we need to make the decision about what are we going to do, what to focus, and we be able to make the decision very quickly, stay focused, and then jointly toward the same goal to drive for the immediately success. I do think this is hard to achieve in a bigger organization for facing this kind of challenge. So like I say, very grateful we be able to work in a smaller organization to make those decisions to move forward.
Yeah, and I want to talk about some of those quick wins because you've had some. I mean, and we'll get into that. But you mentioned the importance of a quick kill, and you mentioned the fact that in a smaller organization, perhaps it's easier to gain consensus around that. Albeit disappointing, I'm sure at times. But what goes into that? If you could give us a little color on, when is it time for a quick kill, and how to gain that consensus before you waste too much time, resource and money on something that just isn't going to work.
Yes, I think for us, or for myself, and basically what I present to the board, it's really 2 key words. One is the prioritization, and the other is how to focus. Mm-hmm. So the prioritization and focus are the 2 things. So first, to prioritize, we need to see what is now, what is later. And so the timing wise, you need to make that decision and create that consensus on that. Second thing to prioritize is what's internal, what's external. The biotech is a complicated business. So it's impossible not to cover many, many different areas. And so it's not to kill the one necessary, because then that won't be sustainable. But it's about what to keep, what's a must own internally and what can be outsourced. So when I be able to create a consensus for this 2 factor, what's now, what's later, and then the other is what to own internally, what to externally outsource, and then we can come to the consensus much more quicker. And then it's about the focus. After the prioritization, and focus means putting all the money and resource on the one we prioritize as we consider as a top priority, and then how much money we really want to put on. So I think more or less that's my strategy to drive for this 3 consensus with my board. And I must also give my board credit. It wasn't hard at all. I think fortunately we all came from very similar background. Being in the Genentech, experience those very agile and fact-driven decision-making process. And I think unique part also, all of us left Genentech about 10 years. Mm-hmm. We all been through different kind of organization and knowing what's the pros and cons. So I truly enjoy working with my board about, when I say those 3 things, it sounds like the 3-step. And most of the time it takes us just a couple of minutes. We just like, yeah, that makes sense. Let's go. Let's just do it. So that, I think that's really helping AltruBio to turn around with such a difficult situation, to be able to move on, and that make a huge difference. That's why within 1 year, and now thinking back, almost within 6 months, we'll be able to get the funding and to be able to drive for the new pipeline projects.
Yeah. It's interesting. The board relationships and dynamics are a tough one to cover from a prescriptive perspective, right? Like what you're describing, years of camaraderie, intuition, fellowship, and understanding. You can't kind of write up a prescription for that. It comes with time and experience, and I can only imagine how it lends to that boardroom dynamic.
That's totally true. Yeah.
The Business of Biotech is brought to you in partnership with Cytiva. Together, we're committed to helping the leaders of new and emerging biopharma companies navigate the financial, organizational, human resources, and regulatory waters you'll encounter on your way from discovery to the clinic and beyond. Check out a host of useful resources for biotech leaders at Cytiva's Emerging Biotech Accelerator at cytivalifesciences.com/emerging biotech. That's CYTIVA lifesciences.com/emerging biotech.
So let's talk about some of those wins. You just achieved, I think, a few months ago, fast track designation for your lead candidate, ABGN 168H, which is a monoclonal antibody aimed at steroid refractory acute graft versus host disease. That's a new win for AltruBio, right?
Yes. Yeah. So we are very excited about this fast track designation. It definitely says quite a bit about the support from the agency.
Yeah. So tell us about that disease and how ABGN 168H addresses it.
Yeah. So for steroid refractory acute graft versus host disease, it's a very severe disease. The mortality rate is very high. And the background of the disease, if I can do that very quickly, basically the patient start with the blood cancer, so anything involved for the hemolytic cancer, and then went through many kind of different standard treatment, including chemo, radiation, and it did not work. And then the doctor would decide to go for the bone marrow transplantation. And then with the bone marrow transplantation, it have this rejection response, and then treat with steroid, and then fail with steroid. You can see even the whole treatment process is a lot, and not to mention the patient really suffer disease after disease in order to survive. So unfortunately, up to now, for such a disease, there's only one drug that approved, and that was only happening in 2019. And our lead molecule, ABGN 168H, is specific target towards a late stage unwanted T cell, which is the T cell trigger the rejection reaction towards a host. In a sense, you're thinking about for the bone marrow transplantation, it's supposed to help the host to fight for cancer. Mm-hmm. But now actually the the transplanted bone marrow transplantation cells go against the host, like attack the host. So our drug is specific target those T cell and access to stop. Don't do that. And so that is definitely much more specific and be able to bring down only the unwanted instead of killing all the T cells, because then that kills the whole purpose about the therapy. So with that unique function, it making it much more safe because the patient's immune system is not compromised. And then also it's much more durable because we kill only the specific T cell. So that doesn't allow those problematic T cell to come back quickly. So with these two unique features, that make it much more helpful for the patient. And trust the recognition from the fast track designation, saying quite a bit about this unique mechanism of action can address this disease better.
Yeah. At what point did you, as a company, did you identify that that it would be strategic to pursue fast track designation? At what point did you say, okay, let's put a plan together and go after this?
Yeah, and it's an interesting question because, frankly speaking, when I did my due diligence of our company to consider to join or not, I was looking at our authoritative colitis data, and the data persuade me. But then this preliminary phase 1A data came the very end of 2019, right before I joined. And it's very fascinating. We have 10 out of 13 patient response. And for most of the other, even the one and only approved drug, only have 55% respond and then got approval. And so for 10 out of 13, so that's a very high percentage have the response rate. And to your question about when do we make that decision, when we face all those challenging of COVID came, and then we have the financial situation have to address, it looks like this a medical need, and also the non-addressed by the existing approved drug. It is the right thing to do because this will be quicker approval, also quicker to bring this solution for patient. So with that, basically, like I mentioned about through the discussion between my board and myself, we make that decision in the beginning of 2019. I'll say fair to say about March, April last year. Yeah.
So you went after it. How did you execute it? And I don't, obviously there's a lot of, there are many moving parts on the way to that application and its approval. But if you could give us a high level of what execution looked like, once you decided you were going to pursue it and you put the wheels in motion, what did it take to get it done?
Yeah. And it's easy to say, and I appreciate you asked that question because we at the time have in parallel 4 or 5 clinical studies all ongoing. And you can imagine if you forget about the emotion of the investor, have to consider the patient's benefit too. So we have to make the right decision to say this is making sense to stop and to focus on this particular indication. So the first thing to your question is to actually deprioritize some ongoing activities. And that took a lot. And second thing is really streamline our team. This is not small. For AltruBio, before my time, has a pretty complicated organization, really for the sake of for the future success. But I have to streamline down to, let's just start from the beginning as a startup and down to the much more simplified organization, much more simplified team, and the number of staff. And that is the second thing. And the third thing is really identify the right clinical site and physicians we can work with to make sure our enrollment activation will be quickly. And the fourth thing, in some sense, most important is then to make sure we have the right funding, the right investor with the right mindset. And so that's more or less those 4 different directions to embark this new initiative.
A lot of what you just described is, in my mind, it's one of the most difficult aspects of being a CEO, and that's change management. I mean, when you do things like as you described it, deprioritizing certain projects or initiatives, that's not as easy as it sounds at a personnel level or an organizational level. People that are, I should say, projects that are being deprioritized often have passionate people behind them. What's your best advice to leaders of emerging biotechs who have to make those difficult decisions, deprioritize some things to focus on others, around just having the fortitude to do it as a leader?
I learned early in my career.
I put you on the spot with that one, Dr. Chou.
No, I learned early in my career. It's never being attached to any project. I know it sounds so cruel, but it's totally true. Have to think about when we deprioritize. That also means this project may not be beneficial for the bigger population of patients. Yes, some patients may actually benefit from it, but we need to think about really to putting our resources on the bigger population. I really don't mean it in thinking about the money. Truly, I think we need to put our focus first about benefit bigger population of patients. So if I have any advice, and luckily I learned that early in my career, is then not to get attached to any project, just being very fairly thinking through what really truly benefit for the bigger population of patients. I think when you put your heart in that right place, it's much easier to make the decision.
That's very, very, very good advice. A lot of wisdom there. So let's talk about what the fast track designation is enabling for the company. What does it mean to the company moving forward?
Yeah, it definitely recognizes, as I mentioned, about unmet medical needs. It helps us quite a bit for the clinical site activation, and also to persuade the physicians. And I want to particularly emphasize about when FDA gives us such a designation, and it actually reflects during our application process. They kept asking us the question about what is the unique mechanism of action. And so that means despite they have one existing approved drug, that is not what is missing, right? What is really what we can bring. It's not just another solution, as otherwise FDA wouldn't give us that kind of designation. So for us, be able to then convey the message to the physician about there's still room this drug can bring, which is an existing drug wouldn't have. And in our case, as I emphasized, because the safety. And so we definitely see that our lead molecule, ABGN1688, already being tested more than 170 patients. So that means the safety is there. Otherwise, the agency will kill this drug already.
Sure.
So that definitely have the background to support this drug is much more safer to allow us to increase the survival rate. That safety factor obviously is extremely important. Was it sort of the primary determinant? I wanted to ask you what the advantages. What did the FDA look at and say? Okay, we see these clear advantages of this candidate, this molecule, sufficient to enable the designation. Was safety the lead on that, or are there other elements, other facets of that discussion? Well, for FDA, they always have to put safety first, right? Because that's the agency's job. And so I have to say that is the primary. However, jointly with the FDA and company like us, the sponsor, we want to see the efficacy. So definitely we have, as I pointed out, the early phase 1A data showing 10 out of 13 patients had the response. So that is a very promising indication about this drug works. And so those two factors really allow the agency to see the potential. But again, I will emphasize that's different from that's a regular approval. And for fast track, meaning agency will give the priority to response to our question, to facilitate our quick get to the finish line. And they will give it to the company, have really the unique mechanism of a function. So this is so-called first in class. So that is a unique part, the exciting part about AltruBio's science, is we have this first in class, meaning this mechanism has not been applied for any drug approved today. So this may bring the solution we have not been able to treat for those patients. They're still waiting for new treatment.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on that win. As you said, it was a quick win and a needed one. So a great feather in your cap early on. That molecule is also a phase 2 candidate at AltruBio for psoriatic arthritis, ulcerative colitis, and in phase 1 for acute graft versus host disease. It's also in preclinical non-human studies for solid organ transplant. So I wanted to kind of pick your brain a little bit around this single antibody, multiple indication approach. I know it's not entirely uncommon, but you've made some significant clinical progress with this single molecule for multiple indications. What are the advantages to that approach?
Yeah, this is what we call the pipeline in a product. Basically, with one product to expanded it to many disease area. So the advantage is then the commercial value is high. So that means we can benefit many patients for many kind of disease. Mm-hmm. And this approach, and I probably will borrow my experience in the industry. My first project I was working on is Humira. So lucky for me, the first project I was working on become today's blockbuster drug. Mm-hmm. And Humira took that right approach. When Humira started, we were addressing the rheumatoid arthritis, and then we expand into many indications. And you can see that drive for the value for the patients. That's the same approach we are taking for our lead molecule. We'll start with some quick wins, as we just discussed about the SRA, GVHD, and those are the unmet medical needs. Then we will apply this mechanism into, like you just pointed out, all those indications to benefit multiple different indications to enhance the value of the product.
Mm-hmm. My very simplistic mind, when I think about what could be challenging about that approach, goes back to identification of targets, identification of indications. Where can we apply this mechanism of action? So I'm going to make an assumption and assume that one of the challenges of that approach is saying, okay, well, if we want to expand the applicability of this molecule and its mechanism of action, we've got a lot of work to do to figure out where to apply it. So you can expand on that if you'd like, but I'm also curious, just from your perspective, without my assumption, what challenges does that strategy or approach present?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, your assumption is correct, and I will go back to the word I emphasize about prioritization. Easy to say, and like you just pointed out, that takes a lot of experience to select where to prioritize. Like I say, what to do now, what to do later, and what is the right dosage form also. Mm-hmm. Meaning we have to have the endpoint in mind before we even started. So we have to think about, if we go into any indication, is this end it's going to be beneficial for patients? And if it's not, then we better prioritize on other things. Yes, the challenge will be you have all those options to go in, and people can go crazy about try this, try that, but we have to be very disciplined, thinking about really have the end in mind before you even start, and then focus on the one really truly can bring value first, and then through all different kind of opportunities. It could be even the partnership, right? You don't need to be, like I say, what to do by ourselves, what to partner or out-license or create the outside opportunity to enrich, making the pipeline project not become a burden. So that is basically the challenging approach we are taking now.
Yeah, I can only imagine that, the weight of that challenge. And, it does take an element of responsibility. I'm not going to name names, but I've interviewed executives from emerging biopharma companies who are developing antibodies that they've taken, gone to great lengths to market early as cure-alls, if for lack of a better word, right? And it's it gets to be laughable, right? It becomes sort of a a snake oil salesman kind of thing.
Yeah.
So there's got to be, I guess I'm respecting the discernment, right, and responsibility it takes to do that deprioritization, even where there might be a little bit of potential opportunity, and focus on the real potential wins. What's your so walk me through your development and manufacturing strategy to date? We have discussions with biopharmas, all the biopharma leaders all the time about the merits of insourcing and the merits of outsourcing, and outsourcing development and insourcing manufacturing and vice versa. What's your approach? What is the manufacturing approach and I guess forecast at AltruBio?
AltruBio start with our innovative science from National Taiwan University, a spin-off company. So basically, the company has the lead molecule, the R&D center in Taipei, Taiwan, and we see that as our advantage. So we have a group of very high quality scientists, very focused on immunology, and has a profound knowledge knowing how to take this unique first-in-class approach. So we're going to keep that for the discovery group remaining in Taiwan. But the whole development, once you get into, like you mentioned about manufacturing and develop, we'll take advantage of our experience in US. So basically to some part is our internally handle it, and some part is external. Currently for our manufacturing, we are all outsourced, but we'll be leaving the option open when we get closer for commercial. We may bring some capacity in-house so we can own it, as I say, to decide what to own and what to partner. And that is, I believe that's a key success. And I luckily had that chance to test this model when I was running the Bayer Biotech organization. And I'm happy to see now my prior organization that's more or less all streamlined toward that strategy, and definitely that enable in my at my previous position to drive for many launch of the molecules. And AltruBio will apply the similar principle to, at this point we do a lot of partnership, and then later on we will decide for manufacturing which part we want to own, and then when we would do the outsource. So to answer your question in summary, we own this internal powerhouse in a sense for discovery, still remain in-house. And then we also do the development in US with a lot of focus on attract the talent like we already have from the board to our leadership team. And then going forward to commercialization, we'll explore all different kind of options.
Sure. Yeah. We'll revisit. Perhaps when we get to that point, we'll revisit this conversation. And,
sure.
Well,
that'd be interesting.
It would be very. I'm intrigued by the factors that go into that decision-making process, because obviously it's not a small investment to take things in-house. Well, it's not a small investment to outsource for that matter. So when we get to that point, it'd be an interesting conversation to revisit. What's proven? So as you've worked toward clinical, and now you're firmly in the clinic with your lead candidate. What's proven the most challenging aspect of manufacturing for clinical supply, and how have you overcome it?
Yeah, and as I say, we need to find the right partner to be equally as agile and nimble as we are. So this actually is definitely is challenging, because on one side you want to work with an established organization, but they are much more rigid, right? Because they have the set system, and I think most of the people in the biologics or the new modality world knowing working with a CDMO, you need to have the contract set up. It used to be like 18 months ago, and with the COVID, everybody accelerated a little bit, as still as 12 months ago. And who can know everything 12 months ahead of time? That's almost impossible. So that is definitely a challenge in working with a well-established one. So we took the approach to work with I guess, a so-called like-minded organization. So in a sense, maybe much more agile and willing to be flexible, and maybe not necessarily less established, but willing to have the right mindset. So to select the right partner, to have the, like I say, the like it mind will be very important for an innovative company like us. And I think so far so good. We have the mixture of both. We are working with, on one side, one of the CDMO, which is much more established and having certain rigid system. And we try to get certain project with this kind of partner. And then also working with the other partner on much more quick turnaround and quicker decision making to move forward. And I'm sure this will be the across the board, most of the biotech company are facing this similar challenge.
For sure. Yeah. Okay. So in the time that we have left, we're running short on time here, Dr. Chou, but in the time we have left, I don't want to do a disservice to the other candidate in your pipeline. I want to give you an opportunity to talk about ABGN 268, which, excuse me, from what I understand is sort of a close cousin to ABGN 168H. That's targeted at chronic inflammatory indications. So give us a little update on that candidate and where it's headed.
Sure. So 268, like you described very well, and it definitely has been shown higher efficacy in the non-human primate model. So that gets us very motivated to develop further. And the difference compared to 168H is it will be developed in a subcutaneous format. That means the patient will have the option to do the self-administration. So it's much more convenient. As you can see, dealing with the immunological or autoimmune disease are already complicated enough. To make it much more convenient for the patient to be able to do self-administration will be a huge benefit. So that is the unique nature of it already, and not to mention it has a higher efficacy. So we will be looking into like many indications area you already pointed out, maybe even towards the one like alopecia areata or vitiligo. So those are in addition to the IBD disease area, we will explore further. So we are all very excited about the 26A. Is a very unique molecule and demonstrating even more about what 168 can do.
Very cool. Where is that in the sort of in the clinical continuum? Is it preclinical or are you at clinical phase?
It's preclinical. So we aim to get the IND file next year. Excellent.
Well, I wish you luck on that. I wish you as much luck on that as you're having with your lead candidate. What's the next big step there? What's the next big step for you and AltruBio?
So other than we mentioned about 168, we like to make a significant progress in clinical and push the 26A into the clinical. We luckily oversubscribed out of our recent Series A fundraising. So that allowed us to look for additional so-called immune checkpoint regulator kind of direction. So we will do that through the business development and licensing to consider additional pipeline. So that will be this three big step. We like to see the progress.
Excellent. Clinical progress, regulatory progress, funding progress, expanding pipeline. It sounds like everything's on the upswing for AltruBio, and I congratulate you on that success. And I thank you for the conversation. I mean, this has been very informative and enjoyable. Thanks for joining us, Dr. Chou.
Thank you.
So that's AltruBio President and CEO, Dr. Judy Chou. I'm Matt Pillar, and this is the Business of Biotech. We're produced by Bioprocess Online in partnership with Cytiva, which demonstrates its commitment to new biopharma companies at its Emerging Biotech Accelerator, which you can learn more about at cytivalifesciences.com/emerging biotech. Check that out. Sign up for my newsletter at bioprocessonline.com. Give this podcast 5 stars if you're enjoying the conversations. And in the meantime, thanks for listening.